All right, good morning. It is August 6th, 2021, and that means we are, for the old school part of the industry, 9 days away from the 15th, which is traditionally where some people go, well, the stress is coming off the turf. And we were just discussing that, and we probably think that that is changing year by year. And based on the forecast that we're seeing in the upcoming few days, there's going to be enough stress to go around, whether it's drought or direct heat. It's probably going to be one of the hotter periods we've seen so far this summer. But I think it's one of these times where you don't let your guard down. Online today, we've got Dr. Dave Shetler, Dr. Dave Gardner, and the inimitable Mrs. Pamela Sherratt, and she is going to lead us off this morning. Pam.
Thank you, Dr. Nangle. Good morning, everybody. I would like to say, first of all, how wonderful it was to see everybody at the OTF and the ULCA field days this week. To see people's actual smiling faces live was great. And I always tell the groups that come through that I learn as much from them as I'm hoping they're learning from me, because these guys tell us what's going on in the industry and some of the challenges they're facing. And I actually feel kind of bad because I'm not a personnel specialist, and a lot of the groups are telling me that their biggest challenge right now is labor. They're just struggling really bad for getting good people. So and of course we're agronomists and we talk about the turf stuff, but we'll hopefully have some sessions on that at OTF, and we'll hopefully can address that moving forward as how we can help our industries in Ohio tackle that issue. But anyway, let's get back to the agronomics. As Dr. Nangle said, it's hot and dry, and we're leading into the perfect time to seed. The textbook time, of course, is August 15 to September 15. For many reasons, the soils are warm. We typically, supposedly, have enough moisture. The weed pressure is low, and I know Dr. Gardner's going to address that issue more. And we have adequate time to get those areas mowed, 5 or 6 times before we get our first frost mid-October. So that's why that time is the most optimal time to seed our cool season grasses. However, looking at the forecast and looking also at some of the challenges like the lack of seed, we have a seed scarcity right now. The cost of seed and the availability of seed can be a challenge. So I guess we'll talk about establishment over the next couple of weeks because it is the optimum time, but now is the time to really start planning. And I think you need to plan for, talk to your seed suppliers, what seed is out there. A lot of the seeds now are coming in coated and treated products, and that's a conversation you need to have with your seed supplier. Moving forward, some of the seed suppliers were telling me this week that we might actually see most products that are offered moving forward might have some kind of coating in them as they develop those types of products. So talk to your seed suppliers, see what's available, plan for moisture management. As we know, with seeding our cool season grasses, seed soil contact is key. If you broadcast seed on the surface and it sits in the hot baking sun, it's not going to germinate. So optimize seed soil contact, top dressing with something to keep the moisture in would be great, or slit seed or core aerate before you seed, anything you can do to get that seed soil contact, and plan for moisture management. Syringing the seed several times a day. With perennial ryegrass, that's a solid 5 days of syringing. With tall fescue, that's a solid week. And with Kentucky bluegrass, high management, you might be out there for 3 weeks syringing that seed to make sure that you get good establishment. So plan for moisture management, whether you go out, if you have a soccer field and you're going to be seeding goal mouths or sidelines, maybe invest in a growth blanket. So anything to keep that moisture in. If you're at a lawn, maybe look at top dressing with a compost or some kind of organic material. Again, good seed soil contact, but plan for moisture management because the last couple of Septembers have been really dry. And so we're going into that optimal seed time, but we're also probably going into a month of hot, dry weather. So plan accordingly, and we'll talk more over the next couple of weeks about that. And I know Dr. Gardner's going to add on to some of the things I've just said. So with that, Dr. Nangle, I will shut up.
Pamela, such coarse and colloquial language. Thank you for that input. All right, following on, and that cannot be imitated, of course, Dr. Gardner.
Yeah, so, piggybacking a little bit on what Pam said, I wanted to also talk a bit about establishment. And again, this is the optimal time of year, or we're coming up on the optimal time of year for establishment by seed. And that's because the soil is warm still, which is good for the root system, but the air temperatures will start cooling off, which is better for the leaf tissue. So it's a less stressful environment, one. The other thing, though, is that you have less competition from weeds at this time of year. So, if you tried to establish in the springtime and you ended up getting, 100% crabgrass or 100% goosegrass, maybe a little yellow foxtail, that's not an atypical result with a springtime establishment. So, but that said, those annual weeds are not germinating typically at this time of year. You might see, if you start August 15th, you might still see some yellow foxtail, some goosegrass, maybe the occasional nutsedge that's still trying to come in. But by and large, by September, most of those summer annuals have stopped trying to germinate. And so then, during September, we'll see things like downy brome. But that is something that tends to be a little bit more of a temporary species that infests turf after a couple of years. It tends to fade away. But I also wanted to mention, in addition to compost and moisture management, never underestimate the importance of a good mulch to keep everything in place. Ideally, you'd be using a slit seeder or properly incorporating the seed into the soil. But even if you do that, bury the seed 1/4 of an inch deep, like we recommend. Sometimes during a heavy thunderstorm, you'll have enough water moving around on the surface that you end up having things like this. So the mulch not only helps to conserve moisture, but it also helps to keep the seed where it's supposed to be while it's attempting to germinate. They're a little bit more expensive, but these recycled paper products, with the tackifier, tend to be the better option for a mulch. And one of the reasons for that is that, the alternative is straw or hay, an organic mulching material, but sometimes those have contaminants in them. So, orchard grass or quack grass, if you mulch your newly seeded turf area with straw or hay, you might accidentally introduce quack grass and goosegrass. And these are two things for which we do not have a selective herbicide. And so that would not be a good thing. Okay, so again, we'll be talking about establishment probably a couple more times, since this is the optimal time to do it. But just to get everybody thinking about that, and at a minimum, if you're going to do some non-selective weed control, now's the time to be doing that, to get that area prepared for where you're going to be doing those seeding operations. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that this is the time of year that we start getting emails with folks sending pictures that look like this. And they're like, what's wrong with my grass? And in this particular instance, it's a south-facing slope. It's a 4-year-old turf. And, I thought that this part up here that was kind of the Africa-shaped, relatively concentrated area of lighter green tissue might be some dormant rough bluegrass. And you can kind of dig in there to see if you've got imbibed stolons, and if that's the case, that might be what's happening. But I also noticed that at the bottom of this picture, it's a really thin soil. There's no topsoil whatsoever. I mean, that's just your, limestone based subsoil right there. So what happens a lot is that we see people establish either by seed or sod on soil that's not all that optimal for the growth of grass. And even if you sod, you might think that you've got a little bit of a layer of organic matter there, but after 3 or 4 years, that's probably broken down enough so that you're now trying to grow grass on basically subsoil. And, especially since this is a south-facing soil, I'm guessing that these people are using an oscillating sprinkler, putting out a rain gauge, thinking that they're getting down an inch of water when they irrigate, but that soil can only take up about 5 to 8/100ths of an inch of rain per hour. So the other 92 to 95/100ths rolled down the hill. And so it's probably quite dry in there. They asked if there was an insect or a disease. I'm thinking it's probably more of a pure agronomic thing. They said that the grass looked great in the spring and it started to go bad on them in June or July. And so, it's probably just a water relations kind of issue. So Adding some compost, adding some organic matter, top dressing to try to basically make an A horizon is one of the things that I would recommend with this. But again, those south facing slopes, that can be a real challenge, is trying to keep that adequately irrigated, because you have to deliver it very slowly over a long period of time. Ed, that's all I've got.
Thank you, Dave. Much appreciated. And to follow on, the one thing I think that most people will be concerned about or not thinking about with the water part of it, particularly if you decide to get crazy and seed this weekend, is make sure that your area is treated for some of the water moles, in particular Pythium. And so for a change, I will share screen, because we said the optimal time of year to do seeding in Ohio is middle of August until the middle of September. And my home lawn, as I will show you, was done in May, and I will show you why you should not do it in May, right? This is the exact reason why we don't do this. However, a couple other things have popped up in the last couple of weeks, and one of them was tied to growth regulators, folks. Now, this is an old picture, but the reason that we use growth regulators, and I should put up my PowerPoint to make it run like that. Come on, a little bit more professional, Ed. The reason we use growth regulators is for the purpose of consistency of growth, right? So we know kind of how much we're getting. And so I will put Dr. Gardner on the spot here. When you look at this image, why we got scalped areas and not scalped areas?
Because you did it wrong.
That is perfectly not right. Okay, so the reason we have this is the green areas, the darker green areas, are actually treated with growth regulator. The brown areas were not treated with growth regulator. This was on a research screen a few years ago in the Chicago area. Superintendent dropped the mowing height, and that was the consequence. The reason I brought this up is greens have gotten puffy, folks, right? There has been some issue with scalping and problems with quality of cut in the last probably 2 to 3 weeks. And so if your organic matter is kind of getting up there, that's one part of the problem. But the other way to potentially manage your way out of this is consider getting in on a growth regulator program. I know everybody is there, not everybody, but most people are there. But if this is something you've run into as far as quality of cut, do not be afraid to get involved with these growth regulators. To go on a little bit further, we talked about the dry conditions. And so if you're seeing those footprints in particular over the next 3 to 4 days, do be aware that there's going to be a need to run some irrigation, whether that's a home lawn, sports field, or golf course setting. I am not the foot model for this image, but do kind of look for these things, whether it's also purple canopy on the turf. And of course, this is a giveaway. The turf is also brown because it's starting to really suffer. The other thing we saw popping up this week was grey leaf spot. Now, it is not going to be widespread this weekend and early next week. It might be a potential problem with the temperatures and potential for some moisture up in the parts of northern Ohio. The damage can be widespread and rapid if it starts to appear, particularly on perennial ryegrass and tall fescue. This was on our trial plot at ATI. We have been watering completely incorrectly. Right. So the first thing you will not do is turn on the water at 5 o'clock in the evening and leave it run for about 20 to 25 minutes. So this is somewhat artificially created. One of the first things you can do to mitigate this problem is manage irrigation practices. The other thing from a control standpoint, generally, it's going to be a range of combinations of active ingredients are probably going to be the most effective. The one other thing which we have not hit yet, if you're not thinking of grey leaf spot as a problem, usually, and if you remember, Joe Rimmelspach would have all told you hurricanes, they may bring up some of the spores from down south as well. We're not there yet, but like I said, this weekend, going into early next week, may be an opportunity for some of those problems to develop. And as I said, make sure that when you put the seeded areas down in this heat, that you do treat them, right? Because otherwise you'll end up with Pythium running across, newly emerged seeds, and all that hard work that you put in will count for zero. And that will be down to having to irrigate probably more than you need to or would need to if you were in an established stand with the newly germinated seed, trying to keep it alive in the heat. You will start to see these dark matted down areas. There should be mycelia showing up, that white cotton candy or cotton mycelia across all of the leaf tissue. And while it looks like it's just matted down, it's ultimately dead. I have bare spots on my back lawn to verify that. So while I seeded in May, did everything that I should not do, I will be seeding again in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks. Other things, remember the OTF golf scholarships coming up. That's down in Dayton, and also the OSU ATI golf scholarships coming up. That will be up in Columbia Hills in on the south side of Cleveland. Both of them are the end of September, early October as far as dates. And we are, like Pam mentioned, finalizing a very, very, very high quality education lineup for OTF conference and show, which is back in person in December, and expect to see more details about that soon. So without further ado, folks, I will say thank you, and we will talk to you all again next week. One other thing before I forget, we will do a Turf Team Times live, so you get to ask us all questions and make us look stupid, and it's recorded for public viewing. So in the next 2 weeks, probably not next week, but the week after, we'll probably look to send a link out with your membership email update to allow you to sign in and, like I said, ask us questions and make us feel awkward. So thank you, and talk to you all soon.